Brennan asked on a Tuesday, not because Tuesday meant anything, not because he had been building toward it, or had found some particular courage in the morning. He asked the way 7-year-old boys ask the things they have been carrying for a while. Suddenly, sideways, without looking up from what his hands were doing, he was mending a bridle. Wren had taught him how the previous autumn, sitting beside her on the bench outside the cabin door with the leather across his knees, and he had taken to do it the way he took to most things that required patience and repetition, which was to say completely, with a focus that sometimes made her throat close, for reasons she had no intention of examining. "Mum," he said, "Callum says everyone has a father." She kept her hands moving on the bread dough, pressed her knuckles in, folded the edges. The kitchen was warm and smelled of wood smoke and the dried rosemary she kept in a bunch above the window, and outside the pines stood in their long, ranked rows the way they always did, unchanged, reliable, in the way things without memory are always reliable. "Callum is right," she said. "So where is ours?" Not a question quite. Way he said it. It was a thing he had already decided deserved an answer, and was simply waiting to be given one. His hands kept moving on the bridle. The needle went through the leather and came back through. Wren pressed both palms flat against the dough and held them there. This was coming. She had known it since Callum was 5, and pointed at the miller's son walking with his father along the valley track and said nothing. Only watched with those dark eyes until they were out of sight. She had known it since Brennan stopped asking her to tell the story of the man in the moon and started asking her instead to tell him stories about men who came back from faraway places. Men who had been lost and found their way home. She had known, and she had not prepared, because there was no preparation for this. There was only the truth, or the absence of it, and she had promised herself long ago which one she would choose when the moment arrived. "He lives far from here," she said. Brennan's needle stopped. "Far enough that you've never seen him. Does he know about us?" The bread dough sat under her palms. She could feel the give of it, the slight resistance, the way it pushed back against pressure. Outside a wood pigeon called once and went quiet. "Not yet," she said. Brennan was quiet for a moment. She did not look at him, because she could not. Right then, look at him. She looked at the window, at the pines, at the strip of pale sky above the tree line. "Is that why we live up here?" he said. "Because of him." "We live up here because I love it up here. That's not all of it." He was 7 years old. He had his father's jaw and his father's hands, and it turned out his father's absolute precision about the things people were not saying. Wren took her hands off the dough and turned to face her son, and he looked up at her with those eyes. Her eyes, at least she had that. They had her grey eyes, and waited. "No," she said, "that's not all of it." He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something he had already decided to accept. "Posts." Then he looked back down at the bridle and put his needle through the leather again. She stood at the table and watched him work, and the feeling in her chest was not nameable as any one thing. It was the accumulated weight of 7 years of mornings just like this one. 7 years of making porridge and mending bridles and notching the doorframe in spring. 7 years of building something whole and good out of what had been handed to her, which had been almost nothing, proud of what she had built. She was also so tired. Callum, who woodshed. With Callum came in from the woodshed with 2 logs and kicked the mud off his boots against the step. He was 8, broad-shouldered already in the way that meant he would be large eventually, and he moved through the cabin the same way. He moved through everything, occupying space without apology, certain of his welcome. He set the logs beside the hearth and looked at the 2 of them. "Did you tell him?" he said. Wren looked at her older son. How long have you two been planning that?" Callum's expression not change. "He wanted to know. I said to ask you. And if I hadn't answered, I'd have asked next." He said it plainly, without challenge, just fact. He picked up the poker and moved the fire around, and Wren stood between her two sons in the warm kitchen on a Tuesday and understood, with the specific clarity of a reckoning that has been postponed too long, that the mountain had given her everything she had asked of it, and it was not going to be able to give her this. Some things could not be outrun by altitude. She had been 19 when she came to Ashford House, not as a parlour maid, because she had no references and no family name worth anything. And the housekeeper, Mrs. Pell, had looked at her across the kitchen table with the assessing eye of a woman who had seen 100 girls like her, and made her feelings about the category plain. She had come as a laundry maid, the lowest rung, the one where you did not go above stairs unless you were carrying something, and you did not speak unless spoken to, and you learned very quickly which floorboards creaked and which corridors were used by the family, and which were for people like you. She had not expected to matter. She had not come to Ashford House to matter. She had come because her mother was dead, and the landlord had taken the cottage, and she had 4 shillings, and nowhere to sleep. Duke of Ashford had noticed her 11 months after she arrived, not in the way she had been warned about, because the warnings she had been given by the older laundry maid, a woman called Dotty, who had been at Ashford House for 20 years and had seen things, were about a different kind of noticing. The noticing that led to dark corridors and closed doors and girls who left quietly in the night. Warnings had made Wren careful and watchful, and she had carried them for 11 months without incident. What happened instead was this. She had been in the East Corridor, carrying a pile of pressed linens when she dropped them, the entire pile, because the corner of the top sheet caught on the door handle of the linen cupboard, and the whole stack unfolded and fell across the corridor floor in a white sprawl. She stood there in the empty corridor and looked at them, and felt for a moment the specific despair of someone who has been holding everything together for a long time, and has just watched something come apart. She did not cry. She got down on her knees and began refolding. She did not hear him come down the corridor. He moved quietly for a large man, which she would learn was deliberate. He had learned it in the army and kept it afterward, the habit of moving through spaces without announcing himself. She only knew he was there when a pair of boots appeared at the edge of her vision, and a hand reached down and picked up a sheet from the floor beside her knee. He was already folding it with the particular competence of a man who had spent years in military camps where you folded your own things or went without. He creased it precisely along the existing lines, as though he had done it 100 times, and held it out to her. She took it. She did not know what to say, so she said nothing. "The handle catches," he said. He was looking at the linen cupboard door, at the brass handle that had hooked the sheet. "I'll have it replaced." And then he walked on down the corridor, and she knelt there on the floor with the folded sheet in her hands and did not move for a moment. He had the handle replaced the next morning. That was the beginning. Not of anything dramatic, something quieter than that. Something that grew in the spaces between other things, in the corridor and the back garden and the library, where she was not supposed to be, but where she went, sometimes on Sunday afternoons when the house was quiet, to read. He found her there 3 weeks later and did not send her away. He pulled a book from the shelf above her head and sat in the chair by the window and read, and neither of them spoke. And she left her before the family was due at dinner, and he did not acknowledge that it had happened. She came back the next Sunday. He was already there. She did not examine what it was for a long time, because examining it would have required her to have expectations, and expectations were not something she could afford. She was a laundry maid. He was the Duke of Ashford. Distance between those two facts was not the kind that collapsed just because two people had read in the same room for several months, but it had collapsed in the end, slowly. Then all at once, the way the snow on the cabin roof collapsed in March, by degrees and then catastrophically. And she had been 22, and she had believed. Because she was 22, and had been very carefully not examined the thing for long enough, that when she finally let herself look at it, she looked at it wrong. She had believed that it was real. It had been real. That was the part she had never been able to fully discard, even in the worst of the first year on the mountain when she would have preferred to discard everything. It had been real. She had not imagined it or misread it and stressed or constructed it out of wishful thinking. What she had done was fail to understand the full ledger. All the other things that were also real. The contract and the title and the 300 people and the weight of a name that had been accumulating obligations for 200 years. She had been one entry on that ledger. She had not known there were others. She was hanging the washing on the line between the two pines when Brennan came up the lower path at a run. "Someone's coming," he said. "Horses. More than two." Wren's hands went still on the shirt she was holding. She set it over the line without pinning it. Went inside. She did not reach for anything. She had stopped reaching for things she could not use a long time ago. She stood at the top of the path, and she waited, and she felt, below the stillness she had taught herself, the specific quality of knowing, the way you know before you know it. "Go inside," she said when Callum came out of the woodshed. "Take your brother inside." He looked at her face and went. The horses came up through the pines, 4 abreast. 3 riders she did not know in dark livery, faces set with the blankness of men paid not to have opinions. Behind them, on a grey horse that cost more than everything she owned, and several years she would never get back, the Duke of Ashford. P was older. She catalogued that the way she catalogued everything now, precisely, without attachment. Lines beside his mouth, grey at his temple, the same way he sat a horse. Like gravity was a suggestion he had considered and declined. He stopped at the edge of the flat ground. The outriders held their horses. Wood pigeon called somewhere in the pines. Washing moved on the line behind her. Small domestic sounds in a silence that had suddenly acquired weight. "Wren," he said. 7 years. She had not heard it. She had been careful not to remember how it sounded, which had been its own kind of discipline. And she understood now that the discipline had failed because she knew it immediately. The particular weight of it in his mouth, and something in her went very quiet and very tight. "Your Grace," she said. He looked past her at the cabin. She watched him see the doorframe, the notches. The 2 pairs of boots lined up beside the step, one large and one slightly larger. She watched him understand what the notches meant. That someone had stood a child against that wood, and marked the height, and come back to mark it again, and again, and again, for years. His jaw moved once. "How long have you known where I was?" she said. 3 months. "You didn't come immediately." He looked at her. Something in his expression was doing several things at once. None of them simple, because I didn't know what I had the right to say. She had prepared for authority. She had prepared for the cold administrative face of a man arriving to manage a situation. She had not prepared for that. And she took a moment to file it away in the part of herself that dealt with unexpected things and covered the gap. "You can get down," she said. "Send your men to the bottom of the track." He dismounted. handed the reins to the nearest outrider without looking at him and said something quietly she didn't catch. And the three of them turned their horses and went back down through the pines. She watched them go. Then she looked at him, standing on the flat stones in front of her cabin, and he looked back at her. And they were alone for the first time in 7 years, and the mountain was very quiet around them. "Come inside," she said. She put the kettle on because her hands needed something to do. Host. He sat at her kitchen table. Her table, the one she had sanded smooth herself in the second winter, when she had run out of other things to do, and the boys were finally sleeping through the night. And he looked at the room. She watched him see it from the corner of her eye. The drying herbs, the notched doorframe, bridal Brennan had left on the bench, half mended, the 2 small coats on the hooks, by the door, one slightly larger than the other. He was quiet for a long time. "Say what you came to say," Wren said. He put both hands flat on the table. She recognized that. The gesture of a man organizing himself before he said something that mattered. She had seen it before, in the library, when he had been reading something difficult and reached a passage that required him to stop. "I made a calculation," he said, 7 years ago. "My father's contract with House Cauldron. A marriage arrangement, binding, with penalties that would have taken the estate and everything attached to it. 300 tenants, the Ashford name, everything that had been built across 2 centuries. He looked at the table. "I weighed it. I chose the estate." "I know," Wren said. "I worked it out eventually. Took me about a year. I should have told you. I should have." He stopped. Started again. "There were 100 things I should have done that I didn't do. I gave you coin and a direction, and I told myself it was provision. I told myself I was taking care of the situation." His hands pressed harder against the table. "I wasn't. I was avoiding the cost of looking at what I'd done." The kettle began to build toward the boil. Steam moved at the spout. "They asked me this morning," Wren said, "where their father was." The silence that followed that was different from the ones before it. Heavier, more specific. "What did you tell them?" he said. "That you lived far away. That you didn't know about them yet." She poured the water. Her hands were steady, because she had decided they would be. "I've been putting it off for 2 years, since Callum started asking without asking, the way children do when they already know something is there and they're waiting for you to give them permission to ask out loud." "How are they?" "They are extraordinary," she said it without softness, as a plain fact. "Callum is 8, and he already runs this place better than I do. He thinks before he speaks. And he works without being asked. And he would do anything for his brother. Brennan is 7, and he is the most patient person I have ever met. And he reads everything he can get his hands on. And last month he taught himself to mend leather by watching me do it once." She set the cups on the table and sat down across from him. "They are extraordinary, and they have cost me everything I had, and they are worth every single thing I paid." He looked at her across the table. "I know I don't have the right to ask to see them," he said. "No, you don't. I'm asking anyway. I know you are." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "They're in the back room. I told them to stay there. And they will, because they trust me, which is something they learned to do, because there was no one else to learn it from." She looked at him steadily. "You understand what that means? That everything they are because of what was built here, not because of Ashford, not because of your name, because of this cabin and this mountain and 7 years of work. I understand. I need you to understand it deeper than that. I need you to understand it as a thing you cannot undo and would not be permitted to undo. They are mine, yes," he said. "Whatever happens now, whatever you want, whatever your title requires, whatever House Cauldron or the contract or any of it, Those boys are mine first. Everything else comes after that, or it doesn't come at all." He was looking at her with that expression again, the one doing several things at once. She had learned a long time ago to read him with some accuracy, and what she read now was not what she had expected to find. She had expected guilt managed into policy. She had expected a man arriving to resolve a problem. Instead, she found something that looked considerably more like a man who had been living with the specific weight of a mistake for 7 years, and had finally put it down on a table in front of the person it had cost the most. "I came," he said, "because the calculation I made 7 years ago was wrong." Ren was quiet. Not wrong because of the estate. Not wrong because of the contract. Wrong because I placed everything on one side of the scale, and you on the other, and I told myself that was a rational assessment. And it wasn't failure of accounting. He looked at the cup between his hands. "I left out everything that mattered." "What changed?" she said. 3 months ago. What made you find me?" He was quiet for a moment. "My housekeeper retired," he said. "Mrs. Pell. She had been at Ashford for 30 years. She came to me the day before she left, and she put an envelope on my desk, and she said, 'This has been on my conscience long enough.'" He looked up. "She had kept records of the coin I gave you, of the direction I gave you, the date you left." He paused. "And a note that she had written to you 2 months after you left, to check whether you had arrived safely, reply you sent back." Ren went still. "You didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't know. She kept it from me." She said she didn't know whether to be ashamed of keeping it or ashamed of what I'd done. And she'd spent 30 years not being able to decide. He looked at the table. "Your reply said you had arrived, that you were well, that you were expecting, and the birth would be in the spring." A pause. "Plural, that it would be in the spring, and the surgeon in the valley had said twins." The kitchen was very quiet. "She knew," Ren said, "and she said nothing." She said nothing. He pressed both hands flat on the table again. "I am not placing the fault on her. The fault is mine. But I want you to know that I would have come sooner if I had known. I want you to know that whatever you believe about me, and whatever is true about me, I would not have left you to deliver twins alone on a mountain if I had known." Ren looked at the window. Pines. She thought about that first winter. The surgeon, who came up from the valley on a borrowed horse in the snow because she had left word at the mill and someone had passed it on. The 2 of them arrived in February, small and loud, and completely without any awareness of what they had cost her to produce. Fire she had built back up herself after, because the surgeon had to leave before dark, and she was alone again with 2 infants and no help and no name to call on, and she had built the fire. And she had not allowed herself to think about anything except what needed to be done next. For a long time, that had been how she survived. Only what needed to be done next. "I believe you," she said. "That you would have come." She looked back at him. "I don't say that as forgiveness. I say it because I have spent 7 years being very precise about what is true and what isn't. And I think it's true. You would have come." She paused. "That does not mean it wasn't your fault. Your choice put me in a position where my safety depended on a housekeeper's conscience. That is on you. It also doesn't change what I said. They are mine first. Then say what you actually want." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched him find it, whatever it was he had come here to say. Not the preamble, not the accounting, the actual thing. "I want to know them," he said. "I want the chance to know them. I am not asking you for anything else. Not for the title. Not to take them anywhere. Not to change what you've built here." He looked at her across the table with those steady dark eyes. "Past. I am asking for the chance to be something to them. Whatever they decide that is. That's their decision," Ren said. "Not mine, not yours. You'll have to ask them. And they may say no. I know that too." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she pushed back her chair and stood and went to the door of the back room and knocked twice. They came out the way they came into most things. Callum first, measuring the room in a single glance, and Brennan behind him, more careful, more watching. They stopped when they saw him. The Duke of Ashford sat at her kitchen table and looked at his sons for the first time, and Wren stood to the side and watched his face. And she would carry what she saw on it for the rest of her life. Triumph, not relief. Something far more demolished than either of those things. Something that looked like a man who had understood something intellectually for a long time, and had just, for the first time, understood it completely. Callum looked at him with those dark eyes for a long moment. "You're him," he said. Not a question. "Yes," the Duke said. Callum looked at Wren. She kept her face still and open. The expression she had learned for moments that required him to make his own assessment without her weight on it. Callum looked back at the Duke. "You have my jaw," he said. Something flickered in the Duke's expression. "You have mine." Callum considered that. Then he walked to the table and sat down in the chair across from the man he had never met and had been carrying in a specific, unnamed place for most of his 8 years. And he put both hands flat on the table, in the way Wren had just watched his father do. And he said, "My mother built everything here. If you say anything to make her less than that, I'll ask you to leave, and she won't have to." The Duke looked at him for a long moment. "I understand," he said. "Good." Callum looked at his brother. Brennan had not moved from the doorway. He was looking at the Duke with the particular attention of someone who was very carefully learning a thing by sight alone. Duke turned to look at him, and they regarded each other across the kitchen in silence for a moment. "You have your mother's eyes," the Duke said. Brennan looked at Wren. She nodded once. Brennan came and sat beside his brother, and the four of them were at the kitchen table, and outside the pines stood their ground, and the washing moved on the line, and the mountain was very quiet around the cabin where something was very slowly. In the way of things that have no choice left but to begin. Beginning, he came back the next day, and the day after that, he left his men in the valley, and he rode up alone, arriving mid-morning, leaving before dark. He did not push for anything. He answered what he was asked, and asked nothing in return that had not already been offered. Wren watched all of this with the precision she brought to everything, cataloguing it the way she catalogued a late frost or a loose shutter, noting it, assessing it, filing it. On the fourth day he arrived with a saddlebag, and he set it on the table, and he looked at her. "There are things," he said, "that I should have sent up here a long time ago. I had them held at the estate, because I didn't know what else to do with them. That's not an excuse, telling you so. You understand, these weren't gathered in the last 3 months." She looked at the bag. First thing he took out was a letter, old. The paper had the particular fragility of something that had been folded and unfolded many times. He set it on the table without unfolding it. "That's the first letter you sent Mrs. Pell," he said. "She gave me everything she had. Read this 1 more times than I should have." The second thing was a small book. Wren looked at it, and something moved in her chest because she recognized it. A collection of essays on natural philosophy that she had left behind when she left Ashford. Left on the library shelf because it was not hers to take. She had thought about that book several times over the years, with the specific grief of small losses. "Found it on the shelf," he said. "After you left, I kept it." The third thing was a drawing. She picked it up and looked at it, and did not understand it for a moment. It was a sketch of a woman, seen from behind, sitting in a chair by a window, reading, the line of a shoulder. The particular way a person holds themselves when they are absorbed. She looked at it for a long time. "You drew this," she said. "Third Sunday." He was looking at the table. "You didn't know." She set it down. "How long," she said, "before the end? How long had you known about the contract?" She absorbed that. "You knew for 2 years that it would end," she said, "and you said nothing. Because you didn't want to give it up yet." He looked at her. "Yes. That is the worst of it," she said. "Not the sending away, the 2 years before it. 2 years of knowing and choosing to keep going." She kept her voice level because losing it would cost her more than it would cost him. "That is the part I needed you to say out loud." "I know," he said. "That is why I said it." She stood at the table and looked at the 3 things he had kept for 7 years. And she thought about a man sitting in an estate somewhere to the south, with an old letter and a borrowed book and a drawing of a woman who did not know she was being drawn, and she thought about what that was. Not guilt management, not the performance of regret, but the specific shape of a person who has been carrying something and has kept the evidence of it because he could not make himself throw it away. She did not forgive him. She was not ready to forgive him, but she understood, for the first time, that what she had believed about him for 7 years, that he had felt nothing, that the calculation had been clean, that she had been easy to close a ledger on, was not true. That was its own kind of complicated. It was Brennan who asked first. He came to her on the 6th evening, after the Duke had ridden back down the track, and he sat beside her on the bench outside the cabin door with his hands in his lap and his grey eyes on the middle distance, and he said, "Is he going to keep coming? Do you want to?" Wren said. Brennan was quiet for a moment. "He knows things," he said. "He told me today about the river that runs through the South Valley, how it changes course every 20 years, how you can tell where it used to run by the shape of the banks. He knows about the geology of it, why the rock is different colours at different heights." He paused. "I want to know things like that." "You can want that," Wren said. "Is that enough of a reason to want him to come back?"
"It doesn't have to be more than it is."
She looked at the tree line, at the last light sitting on the top of the pines. "He is your father. That is a true thing. It doesn't have to mean everything all at once. It can mean just what it means right now, and be more or less later." Brennan thought about that for a while. "Callum's angrier than I am," he said. "He won't say it. I know that too. Is he allowed to be?" "Yes." She put her hand over his on the bench. "Both are. Whatever you feel about it is allowed. There isn't a wrong answer." Brennan turned his hand over under hers and held on for a moment, the way he had done when he was small and was not going to admit to being frightened. Then he let and stood up and went inside, and she heard him and Callum talking in the back room in the low, specific voice of 2 people who have shared a space their whole lives and have their own language for the things that matter. She sat outside in the last light and let the mountain be quiet around her. In the morning, Callum was waiting when the Duke rode up. He was sitting on the flat stones at the top of the path with his arms on his knees, and the Duke pulled up the grey horse and looked at him and waited. "You're going to keep coming," Callum said. "If you'll have me, I'll have you up here." Callum looked up at him with those dark eyes, his father's eyes, and his voice was 8 years old and about 40 years old simultaneously. "I don't know yet about anything else. I don't know about your estate or your name or any of that. It's separate. And you don't get to make my mother less than she is. I mean by being here, by making it seem like she needed someone to come fix things. She didn't. Everything here she built. You showing up doesn't change that." The Duke looked at him for a long moment. Then he got down from the horse and crouched down so they were at the same level, which was not something Wren had seen him do before. Lower himself that way, physically place himself at a boy's height without theatre or condescension, just straightforward equality. "Your mother," he said, "built something I could not have built. I want you to know that I understand that completely. I am not here to fix anything. I am here because I should have been here a long time ago, and I wasn't, and I am trying to be here now." He held the boy's gaze. "That is all I have." Callum looked at him. "Okay," he said. He stood up. "Brennan wants to know more about the valley geology. I know a great deal about valley geology." "Good." Callum started toward the cabin, stopped, looked back. "You can put your horse in the paddock if you want. The latch sticks on the left." He went inside. The Duke stood on the flat stones with the grey horse behind him, and he looked at the cabin and the washing line and the notched doorframe, and Wren watched from the window, and she saw it. The specific quality of a man who has arrived, finally, at something he does not have the language for, and is standing inside it, and letting it be real. She had not known what cold was before that winter. She had grown up in a town, cold. There was a thing that happened outside, that you moved through on your way to somewhere heated, that had edges and limits. Cold up here was different in kind, came through the cabin walls the way water comes through stone. Slowly, completely, with no particular malice, but also no mercy. First night she understood it. She was 7 months along, and both of the goats she had bought with the last of the coin were sick, and she had no more coin, and the snow had been falling for 3 days. She sat down on the cabin floor with her back against the wall, and she had thought about giving up. Death. Not that, just returning, going back down to the valley, finding someone, anyone, and saying, "I cannot do this, I need help." She had thought about it for a long time. Then she had gotten up and gone to see to the goats, because there was no one to go back to. That was the truth she had to hold on to every time the cold got into her, and the weight of what she was carrying. The boys, the mountain, the specific loneliness of someone who has been deliberately cut loose from the world she knew, pressed on her until she could not find the bottom of it. There was no one. There was only forward, only the next thing, and then the thing. After that, and if she stopped moving through those things, she would simply stop, and 2 lives that had not asked to be made would stop with her. She did not stop. She learned to cure the goats. She learned to bank a fire so it lasted the night. She learned to read the particular colour of the sky before snow, and to keep an extra week's flour against it. She learned to split wood with her hip. Turned out for balance. The way the mountain woman at the lower farm had shown her in exchange for help with the harvest, and she learned to set a snare and to skin a rabbit cleanly, and to keep the entrails for the dogs that weren't her dogs, but that came around anyway, and that she fed because they were company. She learned to be alone. That was the largest learning. Not the practical things, though those mattered. The actual learning to be alone, to stop reaching in the quiet hours for the idea of someone who was not there, to stop replaying the library and the pressed linens and the handle he had ordered replaced, to take all of that and put it somewhere in herself where it could sit without poisoning everything around it. It had taken 2 years. But then the boys had started talking, and then they had started asking. And she had put the 2 years of work aside to deal with the next thing, and then the next thing. And then Brennan had asked on a Tuesday, and someone had come up through the pines on a grey horse, and here they were. Here they were. On the 7th day he brought the rest of it. Not the objects this time. Document. He set it on the table and did not explain it, and waited. She picked it up. It was Mrs. Pell's handwriting. She recognised it immediately. The housekeeper had written her 3 notes in 11 months. All functional, all correct. The handwriting of a woman who had learned to write for utility and applied it that way. This was different. This was several pages, and the handwriting was not entirely steady. And she began to read it and understood within the first paragraph that she was holding 30 years of a woman's conscience finally set down on paper. Mrs. Pell had known about the contract, not the details. She had not known the specific legal architecture of it, the penalties, the timeline. But she had known there was one. She had known, when the Duke began spending Sunday afternoons in the library, that it would not end well for the girl from the laundry. She had known, and she had said nothing, because it was not her place, and because she had told herself, with the specific pragmatism of a woman who has survived in service for 30 years, that girls like that always learned eventually, and it was better for them to learn quickly. She had not known about the pregnancy part she wrote about at length. In a way that made Wren understand, she had been writing this particular passage and rewriting it for a very long time. She had not known, and when Wren's letter arrived 2 months after she had gone, she had written on her own initiative the letter Mrs. Pell had told the Duke about, the one with the twins. She had held it in her hands in the kitchen at Ashford House, and she had understood that she had been wrong about what a girl like that always learned. Some things you did not learn quickly. Some things you carried up a mountain and built a life around and raised 2 boys beside and still had not finished learning at the end of 7 years. Mrs. Pell wrote, "I told myself I was protecting the household. I told myself the situation was already resolved, and reopening it would serve no one. Told myself many things for many years. I am writing this now because I am old enough to understand that the things I told myself were not true, and I am tired of the weight of them." And then at the bottom of the last page, in handwriting that had gone shakier still, "I am sorry, Wren. I do not expect you to forgive me. I only ask that you know it was not nothing to me. It was never nothing." Wren set the letter down on the table. She did not say anything for a long time. The Duke sat across from her and waited. He was good at waiting. She had forgotten that. He could sit in a silence without filling it, without managing it, without the particular nervous energy of people who find silence threatening. He simply sat in it and let it be what it was. "She was kind to me," Wren said. "In the early months. She didn't have to be, and she was. That's the worst part. She wasn't a cruel woman. She just decided." Wren looked at the letter. "Decided it wasn't her place. Decided I was a category of person that things like this happened to, and that was simply how it was." She looked up. "That's not cruelty. That's something worse than cruelty. That's someone deciding you don't." He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not guilt exactly. Something more like the face of someone who has been confronted, very directly and precisely, with the shape of what their choice cost another person, and cannot look away from it. "I made the same decision," he said. "When I sent you away, I made a calculation that placed you in a category of person that decisions like that happen to. I told myself it was practical. I told myself you were resilient." He paused. "I told myself you would be all right. That's not the point." "No," she said. "It isn't." She folded Mrs. Pell's letter carefully along its existing creases and set it beside the drawing and the book and the old letter from the first winter. 4 things on the table. The ledger of what had been kept and what had been lost, and what 7 years looked like when you laid them out, in paper and leather and ink. "I'm going to write to her," Wren said. "Mrs. Pell, I'm going to write and tell her." She stopped, thought about what she wanted to say. "I'm going to tell her that the boys are well, that they are extraordinary, that whatever she carried, she can put it down." She looked at the letter. She's old. She doesn't need to keep carrying it. He was quiet for a moment. That is more than she deserves, he said. Probably. Ren looked at the window, at the pines. But it's what I want to do, not for her. Because I'm tired of things being carried that don't need to be carried anymore. Callum came to her on the 8th night. Not for comfort. He was not that kind of child, had never been the kind to seek comfort directly, came at it sideways when he needed it at all. He came and sat on the edge of her bed while she was reading, the way he had done since he was 4. And he was quiet for a while, and she waited. He watches you, Callum said. Ren kept her eyes on her book. I know. When you're not looking, the way. Callum stopped. She could feel him searching for the right framing. The way he always did when he was trying to be precise. The way I watch the weather on the North Ridge, when I want to know what's coming and I can't ask it directly. She set her book down. You notice a great deal, she said. I notice everything. He said it without pride, just fact. Is that his fault? That I do. She looked at her son, his jaw, his eyes, his 8-year-old shoulders already carrying weight they had decided to carry without being asked. And the feeling in her was not nameable. It was all the years at once. It might be where it comes from, she said. In the way that brown eyes or long fingers come from somewhere. What you do with it is yours. She paused. You've used it well. Callum was quiet for a moment. He asked me today what I wanted to be, he said, when I was older. What did you say? I said I didn't know yet. I said I wanted to understand how things worked. The mountain. The farms. Why the south fields grow better than the north ones. He looked at his hands. He said, the north fields are sitting on clay and the drainage is wrong, and he said he could show me how to tell the difference between soil that drains well and soil that doesn't, just by looking at what grows in it. Do you want to learn that? Yes. He looked up, that aloud. Of course it's allowed. I don't want you to think. He stopped again. Found it. I don't want you to think that learning things from him means I think he was right. About before. About what he did. Those are different things, Ren said. You can take what someone has to offer and still know what they cost. Things can both be true. Callum thought about that. That's complicated, he said. True things are. He sat there a little longer. Then he said, in a voice that was trying to be casual and not quite managing it, is he going to take us away from here? No. No. She said it without hesitation, because it was the one thing she was completely certain of. Psst. No one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go. That is not a thing that is on the table. But he's a duke. He is, and I am your mother. And on this mountain, that is the only title that matters. Callum looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, with the specific quality of a child who has been told something and has decided to believe it completely. And he got up and went back to bed. She sat with her book in her lap, and the lamp burning low and outside the stars were very bright and very cold above the pines, and she thought about what she had told her son. And she held it in her hands the way she held everything that mattered, carefully, with both hands, checking it from all sides. She was also aware that the man who came up from the valley every morning was making it easier, day by day, to imagine a version of the future that she had not allowed herself to imagine for a very long time. That was not the same as forgiving him. That was not the same as trust. That was something smaller and more precarious than either of those things. A thing that could still be dropped, that she was holding in both hands and being very, very careful with. She turned down the lamp. Outside, the mountain held its ground. She had not slept properly in 9 nights, not from grief or fear, or any of the dramatic reasons insomnia usually arrived, from the particular alertness of someone whose world has shifted, and whose body has not yet caught up with the new geography. She lay awake and she listened to the mountain. The way the wind moved differently above the tree line than below it, the particular creak of the cabin. When the temperature dropped before dawn, the rhythm of the boys breathing in the back room, and she thought about what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She had not thought about that in 7 years. There had not been room. 7 years was the project, every day of it, and she had been good at it. She was still good at it. Callum was 8, and Brennan was 7, and the bridle Brennan had mended was better than the one Wren had mended beside him. And the fence post Callum had fixed with the Duke's guidance was straighter than any fence post she had set herself. And something in the shape of what was needed from her was beginning, slowly, to change. She was 30 years old. She had not thought of herself as a person with a future in a long time. She had thought of herself as the person standing between her children and the future, which was a different thing entirely. On the 10th morning he arrived, and she was outside before he reached the flat stones, which was not how it had been. She had let him come to the door each time before. She stood on the path this time, and he pulled the horse up and looked at her and read whatever was on her face, which she had decided not to manage for once, to simply let be what it was. "Something I need to know," she said. "The estate, Ashford, what it needs from you, title, the name, the things that come with it." She looked at him steadily. "Is any of it going to come here and try to change what this is?" He was quiet for a moment. "I have a steward," he said. "A good one. The estate runs. Does not require me present every day." He held her gaze. "I am not suggesting anything. I am only telling you what is true. I'm not asking you to suggest anything. I know. You're asking whether what I want is compatible with what you've built." He looked past her at the cabin, at the mountain above it, at the particular quality of the sky up here that was different from the sky in the valley, clearer and colder and more honest. "Think it is. I think it could be." He paused. "But that is not my decision." "No," she said. "It isn't." She stepped back to let him pass. He tied the horse and went inside, and she heard Brennan's voice immediately. The particular brightness of it, when he was about to ask something that had been sitting in him overnight. And she stood on the path for a moment longer. The notches in the doorframe caught the morning light. 2 sets, 8 years of them, marking 2 boys growing in the place she had made for them. In the spring, she had put a new notch in the wood that she had not explained, and that the boys had not asked about. She had not examined what it meant when she put it there. She was beginning to. Now, she went inside. The Duke was already at the table with Brennan's natural philosophy essays spread between them. And Brennan was pointing at something on the page and talking with his hands the way he did when he was excited. And the Duke was listening with the full weight of his attention, the way she had watched him listen in the library. A long time ago, Callum was by the fire, pretending to look at his own book, and watching from the corner of his eye, and not quite managing to hide the particular quality of a child who is watching something, and beginning, against his own intentions, to want it. She put the kettle on. She made 4 cups. She set them on the table without comment, and sat down and pushed one toward the Duke and one toward each boy, and wrapped both hands around her own and outside. The pines stood their unchanging rows, and the mountain held everything it had always held. And in the spring, she had put a new notch in the wood that measured something that had no name yet. She was not in a hurry to name it. She had learned, on the mountain, that the most important things did not need to be named quickly. They needed to be tended, carefully with both hands, without rushing toward the end of them. The kettle went quiet. The fire moved in the hearth. Brennan turned a page. He did not ask her for anything. That was the thing she had not expected and kept noticing. He came every day, and he answered the boys' questions. and he helped Callum with the fence post that had been leaning since September. And he sat at the table in the evenings and listened to Brennan read aloud from the natural philosophy essays. The same book he had kept for 7 years and brought back. And he did not ask Wren for anything. Not forgiveness, not a future, not the particular arithmetic of what they had been to each other, and what any of it meant now. On the 9th evening, after the boys were in bed, she found him outside. He was standing at the edge of the flat stones looking down at the valley, which was dark below them and full of the faint light of scattered farms, and the sky above the pines was heavy with stars in the way it only was up here, away from everything. "You're going to have to go back eventually," she said. "Cauldron marriage." "No." He turned to look at her. "That ended 3 years ago. Cauldron married someone else. The contract lapsed." He paused. I was not waiting for it to lapse in order to come here. I want to be clear about that. I didn't know where you were. I should have looked sooner than I did, and I didn't. And that is its own failure." Wren looked at the valley, the faint lights in the dark. "What do you want?" she said. "Not from the boys. From me. Say it plainly." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have the right to want anything from you." "That's not what I asked." He turned to look at her fully. His face in the dark was the face she had memorized a long time ago, and then spent 7 years carefully not thinking about. And it was still the same face, older, carrying more, but the same, and she was very tired of carrying things alone. And she was also not ready to put them down, and she was not sure those two facts would ever stop being true at the same time. "I want to be here," he said, "whatever that is allowed to mean. I want to watch them grow up. I want—" He stopped, started again. "I want the chance to show you that the man who made that calculation is not the only thing I am." She looked at him for a long time. "That will take longer than 9 days," she said. "It may take longer than you want to give it. I have nowhere else I would rather be." The mountain was quiet around them. Below, the valley lights held steady against the dark. She did not say yes. She did not say anything. She turned and went back inside. And she left the door open behind her. Which was not nothing. Which was not everything. Which was the only true thing she had to give on the 9th night of something that had no name yet, and might not survive long enough to get one. He stayed until the stars began to pale. Then he went down to his men in the valley. Then he came back in the morning. Gear. On the doorframe, the 2 sets of notches marked the boys' heights in the wood. Psst. They did not mark the height of the man who had come back, or the woman who had stayed. There was no measurement for what those 2 things cost, and what they were worth, and how they sat beside each other on a mountain above the valley, where everything had once been simpler. In the spring, Wren put a new notch in the wood. She did not explain it to anyone. Boys did not ask.